perspective, this issue of mental health seems very timely. So in my role as a faculty member, a teacher for many years, and also as a department chair, I can see firsthand how important mental health is to our students, because we know it can affect their success in a college and university environment like Iowa State University. So I'm really excited. See, I think I'm cutting in and out on the microphone. See, there it goes again. Wow. How about this one? Is this one stable? Okay. We might be handing the microphone back and forth. Okay, so I'm really excited to have a psychiatrist, Warren, and a psychologist, Marty, here to talk about this very timely issue, and hopefully you enjoy it. So let's start with Warren giving us a little bit of your story, how you got to be here in this particular area of psychiatry and divinity, theology.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Great. There's probably a joke about a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a mathematician. Well, I want to say, first of all, as the one who is a guest, I just really appreciate you all being here. Thanks for inviting me to Iowa State. I'm here from Duke. It's nice to be at a basketball school, so I appreciate that. And I especially appreciate that you all are here on a night of a basketball game. That's amazing. And I just want to say thank you for that. It's really wonderful to see you. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a theological ethicist. I work both in the medical school and the divinity school at Duke. If any of you are pre-health or pre-med or pre-nursing, or you are a practicing clinician of some sort and you want to study with us at Duke, I'd love to talk with you about that. You can see me afterward. But we're here tonight to talk about mental health. And I just want to say a little bit about my own approach to these questions theologically. But I think I first just want to name that this is not a conversation that's just about abstractions. It's not just about ideas, and it's not about something that happens somewhere out there, on the rest of campus. That whenever we talk about mental health, we're talking about things that are happening like right here in this room, and right here in our own lives, and in our own families, and our own halls, and dorms, and churches, and everything else. And so I just want to name that from the beginning to say that we can't have a conversation about mental health without it touching on some pretty tender spots for a lot of us in the room, either in terms of present experience or past experience. And I just want to say, if that's you, if you're struggling right now, then know that we respect that, and I want you to know that you matter, and that we want you to be able to get help, and we want to talk about hope tonight, and those are things that we want to be able to name. And I also just want to say at the beginning that if any of you are having any thoughts of suicide, as is very common on college campuses, as we may talk about, I want you especially to know that you deserve to get help, and talk with me about that afterward, or with us about that if there's any question about that. So that's one thing. So I'm a psychiatrist. How do I think about mental health as a psychiatrist who's a Christian? I think the first thing I would say is I love being a psychiatrist. I'm a psychiatrist in the VA system, so I work with military veterans. I also teach medical students and psychiatry residents at Duke who come to us for training. And I love being a psychiatrist. It's such a privilege to be able to walk alongside people, to be able to get to know people in my practice for years on end. And some of my patients I've seen now for 15 years or more, and we're kind of getting old together, and I really love that. It's a privilege. And yet, there are ways in which I think psychiatry as a field, which is different from Dr. Martinez's field of psychology, but psychiatry as a field can sometimes get maybe a little bit distorted by treating mental health care as a kind of industrial process and treating people as machines. And the way I'd say it briefly, we can talk more about this in the conversation, is if you wanted to design a mental health care system that functioned like an industrial process, then how would you do that? And here's how I was trained to do that in my training as a psychiatrist, which is for people to come into my office with what we might say is unwanted experience or behavior. People are thinking in ways they don't want to think, they're feeling ways they don't want to feel, they're acting in ways they don't want to act. And I'm trained to see that and say, oh, I recognize what's happening with you. You're having symptoms. And so that's a way of naming someone's experience as symptoms. And then I'm trained to cluster together symptoms into diagnoses, which might be generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder or any number of other labels that I assign people. And then once I have a diagnosis, I can reach into my toolbox of evidence-based therapies and techniques and say, well, here's what you need for this disorder. So I can prescribe a medication, or I can refer someone for therapy, or any number of other things. And then if someone leaves my office and they come back in I don't know, a week or 2 or 3 or 4, and they say, my symptoms have reduced, then I say, great, the treatment's working, so let's continue what we're doing. Or if it's not working, then we'll make a change. And so, in other words, we can reduce people to symptoms and symptoms to diagnoses, and then we can apply techniques to diagnoses in a way that sees healthcare or mental health care as just a matter of reducing symptoms. It's just a symptom reduction process. And there's a lot of good things about that. So if my patients come to me and they're depressed or they're anxious or they have anything else, and I want people to feel less distressed, and I want people to have fewer symptoms. But there's something that's missing if we think about mental health care just as a matter of reducing symptoms. One thing that's missing is that tends to focus the problem inside of us. People tend to think, well, I'm depressed, so therefore there's something happening inside of me, or I'm anxious, or something happening inside of my brain, and it's my problem as an individual to fix. Whereas in fact, I think a lot of what we see on college campuses now with rates of depression and anxiety, it's not what's happening inside of us, it's what's happening outside of us in the cultures in which we live and in the way that we relate to each other, in the communities that we live in. And so we need to think about mental health as being not just a problem of individuals, but it's something that has to do with how we live in community together. It also, a focus on symptoms also sometimes leads us to think, well, if health is just reducing symptoms, then it's not so much about what does it mean to live wisely and fully in the world? What does it actually mean to live well and in a full way? And I think also it doesn't get to some of the deeper questions that I think a lot of us carry throughout our lives, which is things like, do I matter? And am I loved? And what's my life really worth? So I think thinking about mental health care as reducing symptoms has benefits, but it also isn't enough. And this is where I think Christian faith matters so much for the way that we think about ourselves, for the way we think about what mental health is, what mental health care is. And I would just briefly say 4 things, and then we'll kind of come back to this over the course of the conversation. 4 things that I would affirm as a Christian that I think matter for how we think about mental health and mental health problems. The first thing and the most important thing that I can say tonight is that the deepest truth of who each of us is, who you are, who the person beside you is, who anyone who you know is that God knows us and loves us. That we are God's creatures. God knows us and sees us and loves us. And when God looks at us, God sees someone whom he loves, and he says, it's good that you exist, and it's good that you're here. It's good that you're in this world. So we don't come into this world just kind of existing and trying to find our own meaning. We come into this world because already you're loved, and we're already known by God. And that makes a lot of difference. The second thing I'd say is, first is that God loves us. The second thing is that we are, if you read the book of Genesis, we are dust. We're creatures of dust, which means that we're bodies, and we feel the limits of our bodies. And we'll hear from Dr. Martinez, who talks about his work with athletes. We are bodies, and that means that our bodies can grow weary, they can get sick. Mental health problems happen in the body, so we have to acknowledge that when we talk about mental health, we're talking about something that's happening in the body. And yet, though, we're not just bodies. We're creatures of dust who are formed from the dust, who actually find out who we are, who become ourselves in relationship with God, with others, with the land around us, with ourselves. And so we have to always think about ourselves not just as bodies, but as people, as persons in relationship. So when we think about, again, mental health problems, they have to do with our bodies, but they also have to do with our relationships and how we're known and how we're seen by others. The third thing I would say, so the first is that we're known and loved by God. The second is that we're creatures of dust who become who we are in relationship. The third is that we are not machines that need to be fixed, but we are those who are on a journey. So Christians believe that we are from God as our creator. We're on the way to God as our hope and our goal and our joy, and our lives are a journey or a pilgrimage. And so we're not machines that need to be fixed or problem sets that need, or symptoms that need to be reduced, but we're pilgrims and wayfarers who are on a journey. And I think, well, we can talk more about this, but I think the most helpful thing that any of us can say when we're facing a mental health challenge or when someone we love is facing a mental health challenge, which is not how can I fix this, but rather like what's needed right now for the journey that I'm on or that the person I love is on. And the last thing I would say is that so much of our lives are focused on gaining control over ourselves, over others, over the world. So much of, a lot of you, if you're studying or teaching at Iowa State, like, you're thinking about how do I take a world that seems to be uncontrollable, unknowable, and bring it more under control through the sciences, through engineering, through other things. And control is a good thing. And though, like, we're not ultimately to pursue control, and I'm happy to talk more about this in the context of our conversation. But we're actually, God didn't put us here just to gain more and more control over ourselves or over others. God created us to be lovers. Those who are drawn into love of God and of ourselves and of others. And so how do we find ourselves moving from control and the desire to always be in control to actually growing in love and in trust and in wonder? I think if we can begin to think about our lives as like as being drawn into God's life and love, then we'll begin to like understand some of the beauty of what Christian faith has to offer.
I could hear this man speak all night, okay, and so that might make him speak a little less. I was profoundly moved by your book.
Don't speak less, for sure.
And as a psychologist, I'll admit that sometimes, in our work or sometimes distant work with psychiatrists, we're always wondering what's going on over there. We're sending our clients, our dear clients, over there, and what's really going on over there? I'm gonna have to ask next time I see them.
It's a good question sometimes. So.
And so to hear this gentleman speak from the heart, to speak from a heart that is aware of the absolute need to attend to the person in front of you. And to know that you're attending probably by your own awareness of our sadness, our fear, our doubt, that really engenders us to the patient, to the client, to the person in front of us, and hopefully engenders them to the hope of healing. And so I'm so glad to hear you love what you do. I always pray that for all of us. I love what I do, and I came to Iowa State for 33 years, and pretty much every day I loved coming. And I think the grasp of that whatever you're doing is a piece of God's blessing to you and to the people you come in contact with. And therefore, whatever you're doing, God intends for you to love what you're doing and love why you're doing it and love who you're doing it for. And so I'm honored to hear that. My journey, when I was a kid, there was always people over our home, and my parents were always talking to people, and my father left his aeronautical engineer career to go into the ministry. and it seemed to double the number of people that were coming over, talking on the phone. We were the first to church. We were always the last to leave, and set up chairs. When, of course, we got there early, I got to help set up chairs. A lot of the churches that we attended were my grandfather's storefronts that he planted a lot of stores. But I grew up thinking that helping people was an avocation. Everybody did it. My friends would come up to me in school, in high school, and the thought of counseling was not ever there. I just thought, well, everybody does this, and now what should I do? So I actually started as a math major, my friend, and and after a year or so, I wasn't loving what I was doing.
I'm really sorry to hear that.
Well, my teacher wasn't, and so she was probably like, yes, let me help you see what else is out there. But I think I was doing this extra credit through my psych classes at grade schools, working with first graders with learning disabilities, and it's like kids and people and teachers, this is so life-sustaining, life and relationship, as you speak about in your good book. And so I chose psych, and I chose actually counseling or psychology, and I did have a point where it's like, it could be psychiatry, it could be psychology, and again, the wise choice was not to go in that way. That felt, for me, like it was a territory that I wasn't comfortable with or confident in, and the psychology, which I think the opposite for you, it was a path that felt like where I could feel God on the journey. And if you're feeling God on that journey you're on, that's likely a good journey. And the more you feel a confidence, in a weird way, that's coming from, because I'm doing it. I don't need the voice anymore, and this confidence, in a weird way, that confidence may point to, and for me in my life, that's not the best journey. You've gone off the road. And for whatever reason, what our body's doing, what our mind is doing, what our self-talk is doing, what our spirit is doing, we get off the road a little bit. And the beautiful thing about what each of us do is help ourselves and help other people to get back on that road. And so I am so excited for the path that I took. I've been blessed with the opportunity. I had a friend when I was an undergrad at UCLA that was extremely involved with sports, very involved with working with athletes, working with the press. He took me to work with him at the Olympics, at World Series, at the Super Bowl. And what a joy, because the thing I loved about psychology too was, you can help athletes with it. You can talk about confidence, talk about conquering fear. And what I came to realize is that the beauty of sport is that, and athletes know this, you have to look at the whole person. Your great book starts off with, sometimes we look at things too mechanically. It's this or it's that. I just stop doing that and I'm going to be fine. But athletes know it isn't just stopping doing something. It's understanding why you did it to begin with, what was actually good about it, what you're going to do differently, and why you're going to do it differently. And so I've had the opportunity, the blessing to work with many athletes for 33 years here on campus with Olympic athletes, and to travel and to see how the mind and body and spirit, will, motivation, drive, fear, doubt, resilience, perseverance, how they all work together for us. And one thing I'll say for now is, if you're afraid, you're halfway there. On our road to courage, you cannot find courage. You will not pursue courage if you're not scared. Courage is fear overcome. And I think I told my, I don't know if I told my grandson or my kids or something, it's like, you pray for courage, look out. You're going to be scared. You're going to come. God does not, you want encouragement, here it is. You want courage, here's something you're going to be a little frightened about, but in that, what feels like darkness, you're going to see a light. And that's me. And I'm with you. And I've always been with you. And will be with you. And this is what resonates about your good book. Wayfaring. Interesting word. And it's like, I like it. Wayfaring, I think I knew what it was. Journey. That we're all on a journey. And it isn't just, well, this journey, this path, but how? How do we journey? How do we make that decision? How do we decide a journey, a path that isn't good for us? And how do we decide how to move out of that? I love that idea of seeing a journey that is from God towards God. Or a kind of another paradox is that as Christians, the interesting paradox is kind of like, once we find God, we know we have to search for God, right? It's kind of an interesting thing. Once we find God, we know that's who we want to search for the rest of our lives. And the beauty of searching, and sometimes it's way more powerful than the answers themselves.
Yeah, so I want to actually key in on the title of your book. Maybe you can say a little bit more about what you mean by that, and why is that such a key theme? Why did you pick that as the title of the book?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks you for reading the book. I really appreciate that. And the title of the book is Wayfaring, and it ties into that third thing that I said a minute ago, that we are not machines, but we're pilgrims for those who are on a journey. And that to me just makes so much sense of how we live our lives. Like we are every one of you in the room, whether you are like a first-year student, undergrad here at Iowa State, or not even to college yet, or whether you're like well into retirement, you have come from somewhere, and you are going somewhere. And sometimes it's not always clear to us like where that is. You know, we might not feel like any sense of direction, but we still have come from somewhere and from a community and place that's formed us, and we're headed for somewhere. And so, in the book, I draw a lot on St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a Christian theologian and philosopher who lived and wrote in the 13th century, who at a time when there was a lot of pilgrimages that were happening all over Europe, and he really thought of the best way to describe who human beings are is as wayfarers or pilgrims, as those whom God has formed, and as those who all our lives are seeking something. And we don't always quite know what we're seeking. Maybe we're seeking relationship, or maybe we're seeking wealth, or maybe we're seeking security. And Aquinas said, we can seek all these things, but if we pursue them only for their own sake, like if you pursue wealth for its own sake, you're going to end up lonely and disappointed. If you pursue relationships for their own sake, then you're going to feel so threatened if any relationship were to go away that you're going to feel disappointed. If you pursue like happiness for its own sake, you're gonna like always be in this eternal quest to like keep yourself happy and worried that it's missing. Aquinas said these are good things, wealth and relationships and happiness and anything else that you could name that's a good. These are good things, but they don't ultimately satisfy us. We're always left longing for something more, who can satisfy all of our desires. And he said we only find that when we rest in God. And that's the ultimate goal of our lives. And by the way, he meant that of everybody. Regardless of your religious faith or your tradition, everybody's longing for something that makes us whole and complete. And he said we only find that in God. So I think this image of the wayfarer or the pilgrim is that we are on this journey that ultimately is is directing us, is leading us through our longings to God. But we get turned around and lost and held up in lots of different ways in this life. But our lives are still those of wayfarers on a journey. So back to the question I mentioned a few minutes ago. If someone's struggling, or if you're struggling, the most helpful question is like, what's needed right now for the journey? Which involves like thinking about where am I going? Where do I want to be going? And what are the obstacles that I'm facing right now? And in my clinical work, when I've seen patients, like that question, what's needed right now for the journey, the answer might be something like a medication, or it might be a hospitalization. It might be those kinds of things, but it also might be to get out of an abusive relationship, or it might be to have a community, the people who care and who love you. It might be for some of my patients to have access to healthy food, or to have access to stable housing. There's lots of things that could be needed. And so if we ask that question, what's needed right now for the journey, then it leads to a broader set of possibilities for what to do when we're struggling.
This journey, one of the things you wrote about in the book was, so much of we do, and when we're seeing a student for the first time, we are handed a sheet. We're handed the sheet that gives us, informs what questions to ask, what information to gather. And of course, this is good stuff. I mean, information is important. I want to know the person. And so the idea of kind of medicine, or even of psychology, is get information, and sometimes it would be get data. It would feel like get data. And what you reminded us in your book is get their story. Get their story. We each have a story that we've developed, are developing, will continue to develop for the rest of our lives. And those stories intermingle with so many other stories that leave pieces of their heart, sometimes their footprint, pieces that become a part of who we are by what we do with those pieces. And so I would absolutely love that the stories that lead to a greater sense of when a person says, I am. Oftentimes what happens is we get into I am, and this can happen with the people we're seeing, our clients or patients. I am a depressive. I am an anxious person. And your reminder to us that God reminds us is almost always to start with I am known by God and loved by God, and on a journey being pulled toward Him. In a journey being pulled toward Him that is filled, that is fraught with situations, voices that are designed to pull us away from Him. One of the things we talked about over dinner was something like shame. It's a tough thing to talk about over dinner, but nonetheless, something that does pull us, is designed to pull us away. It started, Satan didn't want Adam and Eve to just simply sin. He wanted that sin and worked with that sin in a way that would pull them away from God. And the counter, the beauty that God offers us is the Holy Spirit. The sense that when we are convicted, so to speak, convicted in the sense of shown the light, it is done in a way that we can be aware of some guilt, but it is designed to pull us, again, back on the journey toward God, toward forgiveness, toward resilience, toward hope.
Could I ask you to talk more about how you, in your work with athletes, how you see shame operating? And because I think that's really, really an important thing to talk about on a college campus.
The power of sport, and you all know this, that you, as students, right, when you're competing, when you're trying to do, what a great thing. We're given opportunities to do. You're given gifts. We're all given gifts to do, which is a blessing. Now, one of the challenges with that is that Satan knows, dang it, that's a blessing. okay? And there's not much I can do about the fact that they're given gifts and opportunities to do. So what I want to do is for that doing to become the most important thing. That doing, and athletes can be and students can become very keen at, well, that is the most important thing I need to do. Well, of course that is. And society says that, and my family says that when I do, I'm loved. When I do, I'm approved. And so Satan is designed to move us away from, toward doing, away from being. I mean, what an amazing thing to just be present. To be present. To be present with people. To be present with the person across. To be present with a sunset or a sunrise. To be present in our emotions, present in our joy, present in our sadness. To be present with it. And then Satan wants to rob us of that. He wants to pull us away. Do not deal with that sadness. And again, with the goal of, I actually want you to be ashamed that you're sad. I want you to be ashamed that you're happy while your friends are sad. Being. God created us to be in Him, for Him to be in us, for us to be present with those around us. And again, the fullness of that, to learn for athletes, now when they have that sense of who they are and why they're doing what they're doing, it is incredibly freeing. I mean, it's amazing. You cannot always tell when you see someone out on the field or out on the court or out on the pitch, what's going on inside. Are they experiencing the joy of being part of this experience, part of their teammates, or is it a grind? Is it a doing in order to see if I get approved? There's so much in this culture about doing and then getting the wreath on your head and being approved. Approval is a great thing because it was designed by God, but it comes from God. And so that's an initial kind of piece about athletes in this doing and being. And again, the piece of shame you had asked about, oh, what a heavy thing that is, isn't it, for us? Feeling shame. And the thing is, God gives us the ability to kind of work through our feelings. So what we have a tendency to do, in fact, some of us are very good. Some of you are very good at dealing with failure. You're good at it. But the problem is all that energy might be going toward actually building shame. But my security is I know how to deal with shame, as opposed to letting that go, and in that go, moving toward restoration, moving toward learning. The greatest athletes, the Olympic athletes I've worked with, know they're there because of the learning they achieved through failure. And in a weird way, kind of the joy of failure, the joy of pain. You kind of get to know what James said. I remember I scratched my head the first time, as you're going through troubles, you're going through trials and tribulations. It's like, yeah, James knows what I'm going through. Well, count on all this joy. And that is and I've come to know a God that is not happy about our struggles. But boy, He is aware that what is on the other side that James shared with us, that athletes know, kind of the no pain, no gain. It's like when you push through, when you seek the help and the light that was designed all along to be with you during this storm, you develop resilience and perseverance and hope and strength and confidence, a confidence that is not in because I did well. I always told athletes there's two types of confidence. I'm confident because I made my last shot. boy, what if you miss your last shot, then there goes your confidence. If you miss your next shot. I'm confident because of who I am and why I do what I do and how I prepared. I'm confident in that I bring my focus and I have technique that I've used and learned, and I build a consistency in doing good to show who I am and why I'm doing this.
I really appreciate that, and I think that shame is so present for us, and I'll confess that it wasn't really until about the last 10 years of my life, when I was not young, that I really began to see how it had been operating in me. When I think about shame, I think about it in the way that Brene Brown talks about it, and my friend Kirk Thompson is a Christian psychiatrist who says shame correlates with this two-part belief that gets wedged deep inside of us from a very early age. And the first part of that is that I am not blank enough. Where that blank is whatever we think is necessary to be included and to belong to a community that we really need to belong to. So in a university, that might well be I am not smart enough, I'm not athletic enough, I'm not good looking enough, I'm not social enough, I'm not conservative enough, I'm not progressive enough. It could look like a lot of different things. And the second part is that, so the first part is that I am not blank enough, and the second part is that when other people realize the truth that I am not enough, I'll be ostracized. And so we go through our lives like believing that like we actually don't really belong where we are in the program that we're in, or in the social organization that we're in, or the church that we're in, or the family that we're in. Always worried about getting kind of distanced and kicked out. And what happens with shame then is that the natural response to shame is to like hunker down, to like lower our gaze, to withdraw. And we end up withdrawing from the very relationships that we most deeply need. And so we end up disconnected and putting on a facade and hiding ourselves. And that makes us even more anxious. So, or we can like do things just to numb that experience. And a lot of times when students on college campuses get in trouble, it's because they're numbing the experiences of shame. Or my personal favorite approach is just to basically say, like, I'm going to prove to myself that I'm enough. I'm just going to work harder and harder and harder to prove to myself that it's not true. And truth is, you can like go a long way with that strategy. It can work pretty well. You can get into graduate programs and other things, but eventually it fails. And so the only response to shame is to actually be able to be actually open and vulnerable with God, with ourselves, with others, and to take the risk that we actually are enough. And so what Dr. Martinez said about like the core of who we are is that we're not people who have to perform or have to make the next shot or have to have a certain quarterback rating or whatever, but that we are that we're loved by God, and that's it. That's enough for us.
So when I hear Warren talk about us being on a journey, and when I hear Marty talk about us having a story, the commonality that comes to my mind is an idea of meaning. This gives us meaning. And for those of us that have a Christian perspective, we find meaning in God, and we find meaning in our relationship to God. And I'm wondering, in your respective domains, like how does that manifest when you're thinking about psychiatry and when you're thinking about psychology, the significance of meaning?
Meaning is really important in that it does matter that we see our lives as having value, but I don't want us to think that meaning is just something that I have to write for myself, that I have to wake up in the morning and be like, what's the meaning of my day or of my life? Meaning emerges in community and in the story of a community over time. And so the stories that we tell to each other about what we're about is really important. And so that's why I think the Christian story, like, and especially not just the Christian story as an abstraction, but the story of Jesus as exemplified in the life of the church is really important. And so to be connected, for those of you in the room who are Christian, I know that's not the case, but if you're connected to another tradition, I would invite you to think about what that means in your own context. But if you're Christian, to be connected to other Christians in a life of worship and discipleship and eating together and singing together and serving together in a way that you find yourself like called into certain kinds of service and opportunity by others is a great way to think about our lives having meaning. I've been recently thinking about the 12th chapter of Romans, and the first two verses of that chapter are the ones that a lot of people know. You know, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You know, it starts out, therefore, in view of God's mercies, present your bodies as living and holy sacrifice, being acceptable unto God. And then verse 2 is, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, that you may prove what God's will is, what's good and acceptable and perfect. And as a kid, I memorized those verses, and I thought, well, I just have to like think the right thoughts, because that's what it means for my mind to be transformed. But you have to then go on later, immediately then, Paul, in writing that chapter of Romans, right after that, he says, but don't think of yourself more highly than you ought, but think of yourself according to the measure of faith that God has given to you. And then there's this whole list of like gifts that are given to different people in the church. And he basically says, like, figure out like what your particular inclination is to serve the church and get busy in the common life of the church. So it's not meant as an individual thing, it's meant as a communal thing. Like to find ourselves drawn in community into each other's lives. And so that's a challenge because a lot of us are kind of disconnected from community, but finding good community and then allowing yourself to be drawn into community is I think the way I think overall about meaning.
Here we go. Yes. Thank you, Warren. It caused me to think about, again, boy, that search for meaning. I remember the man searched for meaning, you know, and Viktor Frankl, how he found the incredible place of meaning in a concentration camp. In one of the worst places that man could create, that man through Satan could create, you can find meaning. You can find meaning. In fact, oftentimes we're looking in the wrong places. We're looking in success. We're looking in happiness for meaning. And we might find a sense of it, but it'll be fleeting. And oftentimes meaning is when you're not at your best, you give all that you have. This is one of the things I learned from the Olympic athletes, the elite athletes. They knew they weren't always at 100%. They know their bodies. They work and train day after day, season after season. And they know rarely are their bodies and their mind connected. Rarely are they at 100%. It's amazing. You watch the Olympics and or championships. They're at the end of the season. Nobody is at 100% physically at the end of the season. I remember walking into, whether it's an ISU wrestling room or a week or so ago into the Ames High wrestling room, and they're getting ready for state. And I remember one of the first things I said is, I know that you're not at 100%. I know you're hurting. Congratulations. I know what you've done. I know what it took to get your body not at 100%. But I also know that your mind, that it is possible for your mind never to be sharper than when your body is not at 100%. And the elite athletes know that. I enjoy telling Eric that I use mathematical terms with my athletes that they're at 80%. But again, almost in a sense, congratulations, because it is never where you're at. It is the athletes when they're able to commit to say, and I am going to give 100% of that 80. It is very freeing that you never lose the opportunity, the ability to say, I will give 100%. Never. God never takes that from us. We're convinced of it. We're convinced of it. We'll self-talk our way into that. But God gives us the ability, and in fact, the sense of His glory, when we see that we can, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, that I can give 100% when I'm not at my best. It is incredibly freeing for the athlete, for each of us to know. And it is always, here's one of the secrets to that. Why is that so successful? Because when you're at 100%, it is not necessary for your heart to be engaged. I can do this blindfolded. When you know you're hurting, when you know it's tough, when you know it's hard, and you step up, your heart comes with you. Your heart comes with you because you've made a commitment. I value my next step. I treasure that. And what is a gift that we've each been given is this promise that what you treasure, the choice you make and what you choose to treasure, your heart will follow. And when that heart follows, filled with Christ's blessing, beatitudo is what you call it in your book. Yeah, I'm getting good at that word. Is otherworldly, right where God wants us to be on earth.
At this point, we'll transition to audience questions. So if any of you would like to step forward to the microphone here on your right, Warren and Marty will be happy to take questions that you may have.
Thank you both. My name's Nick. Thank you guys for coming here tonight. Excellent talk. I was curious to hear your guys' thoughts on the difference between being religious and being spiritual.
So those two terms are, in my world of medicine and healthcare, the way that's typically described is that spirituality or being spiritual is more like an individual search for meaning or the transcendent, and religion has to do more with like communities and rituals and practices. And so I think there's some meaning to that, but I mean in an older Christian meaning, before that more modern way of thinking, like the spiritual is just names the fact that all of our lives and every aspect of our lives is lived before God and in the presence of the Holy Spirit. And so we find spiritual means that the Spirit is indwelling us and we're participating in the life of God, in the life of the Son through the Spirit. And so I don't want to see the spiritual as some like completely different facet of life. It just means the fact that all of our lives are lived before God. And the deeper meaning of the term religion, religio literally means binding. It means that people are bound together in common forms of life and service and worship. And so I do think there is a communal aspect of religion that's very important. But I think that Christians don't want to separate the spiritual and the religious. It's like we live our lives before God, and part of our living life before God is we live it together with each other. And so we find ourselves, in a kind of, bound together in a common life, and that's what it means to be religious. That would be an older sense of those meanings that I think is more theologically fruitful. The modern way would be more like religion equals community and rituals and institution, and spiritual is like the individual search.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add real quickly. The ideal is for them to be very close together. That's the ideal. But how I distinguish it is, first of all, religion is like it's this form of theology, right? Theology, psychology, geology. All of these ologies are man's and woman's pursuit of understanding this science, of understanding this God. And so theology and religion will fall short, and it should, because it's people trying and people failing and people together learning and growing. Where spiritual is not an effort by people, but it is a gift. It is a gift that was breathed into us. Like in the book you talked about, we're dust. But it's not like we're an envelope where then he put in the letter, in the envelope, a soul. And so now we're an envelope with a soul in it. When he breathed into us, you said that he breathed soul into us. So now the dust has become embodied as the soul. The whole holistic mind, body, spirit have become one in Christ. And so the spirit or spiritual is this gift that we all have the opportunity, must have the opportunity, do have the opportunity to decide where does that gift come from? Who brought that gift?
Is an introduction required, or should I just state the question?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead and state your question.
Yes, you speak of pilgrimage and wayfaring as a journey to God. Jesus says, I am the way, truth, and the light. No one comes to the Father except through me. Wouldn't this necessarily exclude those who reject Jesus?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking that. Well, I mentioned in the book I talk about St. Thomas Aquinas and his way of thinking. And he wrote this very large work of theology called the Summa Theologiae that has a vision of humans as those who are creatures of God, who come from God, as humans as wayfarers on the way to God, and then Jesus as the way to God. So if humans are on the way, then Jesus is the way. Your question is what about those who reject Jesus or reject his message? I think that the truth is that as Christians we certainly are told to take that seriously and to not ourselves reject the message of Christ, to see Christ as the way to God. That's intrinsic to Christian faith, and I think what we don't know is when God makes all things new, when the new creation comes, how far God's grace will extend. So we can't say for sure that those who consciously reject Christ would be brought into God's new creation, but we also can't say for sure that that's not the case because we don't have that assurance in Scripture. So that's my perspective. So we have to act in a way that is wanting people to know and to accept the way of Christ, and we can also hope for the breadth of God's grace, and I think that's where we can leave it as in terms of being clear about what we know from Revelation, from the tradition of the church.
One thing I'll add is, so much of this world as humans we experience at times exclusion. We do experience exclusion, and that's a sadness. That's a sadness for all of us. And so we see exclusion as a part of this, the way that God is too. And as the question was asked, one thing that I do take heart in is that Christ excludes no one. When the statement is made, the truth is made, is that door is the exit. It excludes no one from traveling through that door. But we do find we are pulled in different directions, that no, do this one, take this one, try this one. This is really the way. And the fact that you can't say you're just not working hard enough. That spirituality in its essence, and I think because of the truth, the evidence of Christ, is designed to be inclusive. And we find ways, and we're encouraged to find ways to say no.
And I'll just add quickly, this gets into deep theological waters that is beyond our scope for tonight, but one specific example of how Scripture wrestles with this is in Romans 9 through 11, just before the Romans 12 passage that I quoted earlier, where Paul, who himself is Jewish and a follower of Jesus, is agonizing over how could my own brothers and sisters be rejecting the message of Jesus? And my reading of Romans 9 through 11 is he ultimately gets to a place where he basically says, I don't know how God's going to do it. But oh the depth and of riches of the wisdom of Christ, how unsearchable his judgments. He's actually trusting in faith that God will redeem the people of Israel. That's my reading of that text. It ends in doxology, or this sense of God's grace and mercy is much greater than we can comprehend. Now that's a specific example, written in a specific context, but I think it's one example of how Scripture wrestles with this question.
Just clarification, is it Dr. or Mr. Martinez?
You can call me Marty.
Marty, when you spoke about the concept of going 100%, I was a little confused on what you meant by it. From what it seemed like to me, it seemed like your version of 100% isn't the effort someone's putting in, but the passion someone has for what they're doing. Am I correct there?
Thank you. This is a young man who really cares about what you heard and what you're thinking, and I appreciate that. Passion is a part of it, but passion into, I'll give examples real quickly as I would talk to athletes. The passion to commit, the kind of be all in. In the all in, I'm all in, sometimes it's very resolute. You'll see in someone's eye, you're not necessarily seeing passion. I remember walking into the wrestling room a long time ago, and I heard about this young freshman that was coming named Kale, right? And so I'm looking for him. It's like I'm going to be looking for someone who's very passionate. He's like the best thing since sliced bread that's come into Iowa State. And so I walk into the room, and of course I see people bouncing around like Chris Bono was just everywhere, bouncing everywhere. But I cannot find Kale. And I have to ask the trainer, he says, he's over there, up along the wall. And I remember getting to know him, and I was worried about him. Like, he's not really intent. The very first match, I was in the locker room and went up and asked him, how are you doing? And I saw the resolution in his eyes. It was different than passion, but it was very passionate in the sense of a commitment to composure, concentration, self-control, and courage. And so yes, there's passion in that we'll see, will not see, is within, but giving your all, in a sense, giving all of yourself is translated into the gifts we've been given, the techniques we've learned. For a wrestler to go out with no techniques, good luck. But that is our learning and growing. So again, that giving our all in doing what we can do, and finally being at peace with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is this the time for the last question?
Yes,
Yep.
one more question.
Great.
I'm gonna go back to when you were talking about Adam and Eve. I'm just questioning about where did Satan come from? Was he designed by God?
Can you say that one more time? Sorry.
Where did Satan come from? Was he designed by God?
Wow.
There you go.
Thanks for reserving the easy question for last. Well, I mean, the church's teaching, Christian teaching, is that Satan is a creature of God, and not God himself, but a creature of God who the tradition tells us it was one of the angels, and for reasons that we don't understand, turned away from God. But Satan's not equal to God. Satan's a creature and doesn't have the kind of power that God has. So yeah, Satan's a creature who's turned away from God, and we don't fully understand how that happened or why that happened, but we are continuing to grapple with the presence of evil in the world.
Such a wonderful question, such a difficult question, challenging question. One of the things I'll add to that, I want to do a little shift. Did God design Satan? What I can say, and what is always hope in my counseling sessions, and one thing I do know that is more clear than the answer of Satan, God did design us to choose, to make choices, which is possible only because we can choose right or left. We can choose forward or backwards. We can choose good or bad. We can choose healthy or unhealthy. And so the residue of Satan, and sometimes it's very powerful, but sometimes I think we need to take the focus off of Satan and demons. It's like, where are we and what choices are we making? And in those choices, we feel the power of God, the power of His glory, or the conviction of something's off. And so God created us to choose. And the final thing I'll say, I kind of shared with at dinner, is like, and this is the sports psychologist, is we start with, I have to. You have to choose. Every little thing, from going left, going right, sleeping in, getting up, who you serve, you have to choose. But here's what God gives us in the fact that He's given us the fact that we have to choose, is the ability to see that, hey, I get to choose when I choose. I get to choose. And then as we grow, it turns to, I choose to choose. I choose to live a chooseful life. A chooseful life, that'll work. A purposeful life, that'll work. I choose that. And in the final step is, I'm grateful that I've been given this choice, that I've been blessed with this choice. I'm so grateful. And we'll falter, I don't want this choice, it's too difficult, I'm getting a lot of heat for this. He gets that. What's the new saying? He gets us. Good, interesting commercials. We're provided. He gets us on this journey from what we have to do to what we get to do, what I choose to do, and almost in the Spirit of God, that is actually a gift from God. I am grateful to choose.